The galaxy had never been so quiet. Once a canvas of vibrant trade routes, bustling systems, and shimmering stations, the stars now seemed dimmed, as if mourning the death of a united galaxy. A silence born not of peace but of annihilation shrouded the sectors that the Zerath invaders had touched. Planets lay lifeless, their cities reduced to skeletal remains. The cries of billions were extinguished, leaving only the cold echo of destruction. General Oron stood in the cavernous command center of the Galactic Coalition, its walls trembling faintly as distant impacts reverberated through the station's hull. The air was thick with ozone and the sweat of desperate officers, their frantic movements mirroring the chaos on the galactic map glowing in the center of the room. Each red mark represented a fallen system, a bleeding wound in the Coalition's fragile body. Oron's silvered hair was slicked back, though the effort was futile. Beads of sweat traced lines down his temples. He stared at the holographic display with eyes darkened by exhaustion, the once bright embers of determination buried beneath weeks of failure. The Zerath had swept through the galaxy like a cosmic plague, their ships angular and black, bristling with weapons that outclassed anything the Coalition could field. Their tactics were precise, their intent cold and inhuman. "General," a voice called behind him, cutting through the hum of machinery. It was Lieutenant Cora, her face pale but resolute. She clutched a datapad to her chest as though it contained the galaxy's salvation. "What is it?" Oron's voice was gravelly, the weight of countless sleepless nights dragging on every syllable. He didn't look up, his gaze fixed on the red lines creeping ever closer to the Coalition's core systems. "A transmission, sir," she said, hesitating before stepping closer. Her boots clicked against the polished floor. "From Earth?" Oron frowned, his brow furrowing. The name lingered in the air, foreign yet familiar, like a forgotten melody. "Earth?" He turned to face her, his tall frame casting a shadow over the trembling officer. "The backwater planet in the outer spiral?" "Yes, sir," Cora said, her fingers tapping nervously against the datapad. "They claim they can help. They've offered a fleet." The words hung in the air, met with a sharp laugh from one of the junior officers nearby. "Earth? What could they possibly offer? They're primitives. They haven't been part of galactic affairs in centuries." "Enough," Oron barked, silencing the murmur of doubt rippling through the room. His piercing gaze fell on Cora. "Play the message." Cora hesitated only a moment before nodding. She tapped her datapad, and the central holographic display shifted. Static crackled before resolving into the image of a man, his face sharp and weathered, his dark eyes alight with an intensity that made Oron's breath catch. The figure stood in what appeared to be the command bridge of a ship, its design unfamiliar and oddly menacing. "This is Commander Kael Draven of Earth," the man began, his voice low but commanding. It carried the weight of a man who had seen battle, who had survived by making the decisions others wouldn't. "We've been watching. We've seen what the Zerath are capable of, and we know you can't stop them alone, but you don't have to." The camera panned slightly, revealing the faint outline of ships in the void beyond the viewport. Sleek and angular, they bore little resemblance to the blocky freighters and outdated warships the Coalition had associated with Earth. Their dark hulls shimmered faintly, as though cloaked in some unseen energy. "We've prepared for this," Kael continued, his gaze unwavering. "For decades we've stayed hidden, knowing that one day the galaxy would need us. That day has come. We have the means, the strategy, and the will to fight the Zerath. All we ask is for you to trust us." The transmission ended, the room falling into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft hum of the holoprojector. Oron turned slowly to face his officers. Their expressions mirrored his own disbelief, a fragile hope buried beneath layers of skepticism. "Sir," Cora began, her voice tentative, "what do we do?" Oron's jaw tightened. "What choice do we have? The Zerath are days from reaching the Coalition's heart. If Earth's fleet is real, we need them." "They could be lying," another officer argued, his tone sharp with fear. "This could be a ploy, a distraction." Or it could be our only chance, Oren snapped, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Send a response. Tell them to rendezvous at Arctis Station. The officers hesitated, then moved with renewed urgency. The command center buzzed with activity as the transmission was sent, the flickering hope of Earth's offer sparking a faint energy among the crew. Oren turned back to the galactic map. His fingers grazed the edge of the console, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Could Earth, a planet long dismissed as insignificant, truly possess the power to challenge the Zerath? And if they did, why had they waited so long to reveal it? He clenched his fists. The coalition had lost too much. Planets, allies, families. If Earth's promise was false, it would only add another betrayal to the list. But if it was real? He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the cold air. The image of Commander Draven lingered in his mind, his eyes like embers in a dying fire. There was something about the man, something unshakable. Let's hope your fleet is as terrifying as your confidence, Oren muttered under his breath. He turned to Cora, who stood at attention nearby. Prepare for their arrival and inform the Council. They need to know what's coming. As Cora nodded and moved to carry out his orders, Oren turned back to the stars, visible through the station's viewport. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, a fragile expanse teetering on the edge of oblivion. Somewhere out there, Earth's fleet was preparing to make its move. The silence of the galaxy felt heavier now, as if it too were waiting to see whether humanity's call would be the spark of salvation or the final note in the symphony of their destruction. The viewport of the Resolute, Earth's flagship, framed the void like a theater's curtain, revealing the stark emptiness of space. Commander Kael Draven stood at its center, his silhouette rigid against the faint hum of starlight. Beyond the armored glass, Earth's fleet loomed in disciplined formation. An array of sleek, angular vessels painted a matte black that drank the light of the stars. Their hulls shimmered faintly with reactive energy shields, giving them the appearance of predators poised to strike. Kael folded his hands behind his back, his leather gloves creaking softly with the motion. The air in the bridge was taut with anticipation, the hum of machinery punctuated by the rhythmic tapping of consoles and the occasional murmur of officers exchanging status reports. The scent of coolant lingered faintly, mingling with the sterile metallic tang that permeated every inch of the ship. Status report, Kael said, his voice carrying an edge sharp enough to cut through the tension. He didn't turn from the viewport, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. We're ready, sir, said Lieutenant Marek, standing at a nearby console. His voice was steady, but Kael could hear the undercurrent of nerves beneath the surface. The fleet's fully operational. All systems are green. Weaponry, shields, stealth drives. Everything's primed. Kael's lips tightened into a thin line. And the coalition? They've confirmed the rendezvous at Arctis Station, Marek said, his fingers gliding across the interface. We'll make contact in 6 hours if we maintain current velocity. The commander nodded, but his expression remained inscrutable. 6 hours. Enough time to prepare, but also enough time for doubt to creep in. He could feel the weight of it pressing against the edges of his resolve. The galaxy was watching, even if it didn't know it yet. This was Earth's moment to step into the light, to cast aside centuries of being dismissed and underestimated. But Kael wasn't naive. He knew what failure would cost. Behind him, the doors to the bridge hissed open, followed by the sound of booted footsteps. Kael glanced over his shoulder to see Major Elise Kaelor, her auburn hair tied back tightly, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She carried the confidence of someone who had spent her life fighting for the survival of a planet no one else cared about. You're brooding again, Elise said, stepping beside him. Her tone was light, but her eyes betrayed her concern. Kael allowed himself the barest hint of a smile. Just thinking. Dangerous habit, she replied, crossing her arms as she joined him in staring out at the fleet. What's on your mind? Kael's gaze didn't waver. The coalition, their desperation. They're expecting us to perform a miracle. We've been preparing for this, Elise said firmly. For decades, we've studied the Zerath, dissected their tactics, Reverse-engineered their tech when we could get our hands on it. If anyone can stop them, it's us. I know, Kael said quietly. But preparation isn't the same as execution. This isn't a simulation. The Zerath won't play by our rules. Elise's jaw tightened. They've underestimated us, just like the Coalition has. That's their mistake. Kael turned to her then, his eyes dark and searching. And if we fail? What happens when the galaxy watches Earth crumble under the same force that broke their fleets? Elise didn't flinch. We won't. Her conviction was like iron, and Kael found himself drawing strength from it. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her resolve, and turned back to the viewport. Commander, Marek said, cutting through the moment. Incoming transmission from Earth Command. Put it through, Kael ordered. The main holoprojector flickered to life, and the stern visage of Admiral Lorne filled the space. His uniform was immaculate, his silver hair combed back with military precision. The Admiral's voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. Commander Draven, Lorne began, the Council has reviewed the latest intel. If the Coalition falls, the Zerath will turn their full attention to Earth. You know what that means. Kael's shoulders squared. Yes, sir. Failure is not an option, Lorne continued. You have the full backing of the Council and every resource Earth can spare. But understand this. The Coalition is not our priority. Earth is. If there's even a hint that this mission will jeopardize our homeworld, you are authorized to withdraw. Is that clear? Kael's jaw tightened. Perfectly. Lorne's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. I don't need to tell you what's at stake. Do what you have to. Earth stands behind you. The transmission ended, leaving a faint crackle of static in its wake. Kael exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the cold air. The weight of command settled heavier on his shoulders, but he didn't falter. Adjust course, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. Let's see what the Coalition has to offer. The Resolute and its fleet moved like shadows through the void, their engines whispering rather than roaring. Kael stood on the bridge as the hours ticked by, his mind a storm of calculations and contingencies. The air around him buzzed with quiet tension, every officer focused on their task. When the fleet arrived at Arctis Station, the sight was sobering. The Coalition ships were scattered, their hulls pockmarked and scorched. The once proud vessels of the galaxy's great powers now looked like relics of a forgotten era, dwarfed by the sleek, predatory forms of Earth's fleet. Kael watched as the Coalition's flagship, the Sovereign, hailed them. General Auron's face appeared on the holoprojector, his expression a mix of skepticism and reluctant hope. You're here, Auron said, his voice edged with weariness. I'll admit I wasn't sure you would be. Kael's lips twitched in a faint smile. And miss the opportunity to prove you wrong? Never. Auron's brow furrowed, but he didn't rise to the bait. The Zerath are advancing faster than anticipated. We've got hours, maybe less, before they hit this sector. What's your plan? Kael glanced at Elise, then back to Auron. We'll deploy in a staggered formation, using decoys to draw their fire while our main fleet targets their command ships. They rely on centralized tactics. Disrupt that, and the rest will falter. Auron frowned. That's a gamble. Everything about this is a gamble, Kael replied evenly. But we've studied their movements. This will work. For a moment, Auron said nothing. Then he nodded. Do it. Let's see what your fleet can do. Kael turned to his crew, his voice rising above the tension. You heard the man. Prepare for deployment. As the fleet moved into position, Kael felt the first flickers of anticipation ripple through him. The galaxy had dismissed humanity for too long. It was time to show them what Earth could do. The void of space came alive as Earth's fleet moved into position, the vessels gliding into a synchronized formation. Their matte black hulls absorbed the faint starlight, making them appear as if they were carved from the darkness itself. Commander Kael Draven stood on the bridge of the Resolute, the faint hum of the ship's systems filling the air, a chorus of readiness beneath the mounting tension. Enemy fleet entering sensor range, Lieutenant Marek reported, his voice taut with urgency. Multiple capital ships, frigates, and drone squadrons. Estimate 3-to-1 odds. Kyle's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. Hold formation. Deploy decoys and activate stealth modules. We want them chasing ghosts before we strike. Around him, the bridge crew moved with precise efficiency, their fingers dancing across consoles that glowed a faint blue. The smell of ionized air lingered, a metallic tang that reminded everyone of the weapons primed and waiting in the silence. Kael could feel the weight of their gazes, their trust placed squarely on his shoulders. Through the viewport, the Coalition's ships were a stark contrast to Earth's fleet. They were battered and scarred, their movements less precise, like wounded animals struggling to survive. Kael could see the hesitation in their positioning, the lingering doubt that came from weeks of relentless losses. General Auron on the comm, Marek announced. Patch him through, Kael said. Auron's image flickered onto the holo projector. His face was set, his eyes scanning the battle display with a grim determination. Your decoys better work, Commander. If the Zerath get through our defensive line, they'll shred our cruisers. They'll work, Kael replied, his tone sharp. But you need to hold your fire until we engage. If your fleet moves too early, you'll give away our position. Auron's lips thinned, but he nodded. Understood. Just make sure you don't miss your shot. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in a charged silence. Kael turned to his team, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Deploy the first wave. Let's see how the Zerath react. The decoy drones launched silently from Earth's ships, their sleek forms vanishing into the black. They were programmed to mimic the energy signatures of fully armed warships, a tactical sleight of hand designed to sow confusion among the enemy. Kael watched the tactical display as the drones scattered, forming false clusters that mirrored fleet formations. Zerath ships are adjusting course, Marek said, his voice tinged with awe. They're targeting the decoys. Kael allowed himself a small smile. Good. Let's keep them chasing shadows. Outside, the Zerath fleet surged forward, their angular ships cutting through space with mechanical precision. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy, glowing faintly as they locked onto the decoys. The first salvo of plasma beams erupted, streaking through the void in brilliant arcs. The decoys responded by dispersing, their programmed evasive maneuvers drawing the Zerath deeper into the trap. Phase 2, Kael ordered, his tone clipped. Target their forward cruisers with EMP bursts. Disrupt their formation. The Resolute fired, its launch tubes releasing a volley of specialized missiles. They detonated in synchronized pulses, invisible waves rippling through the enemy fleet. Zerath ships faltered, their movements stuttering as their systems scrambled to compensate. Direct hits, Marek confirmed. They're losing cohesion. Kael's eyes remained fixed on the display. Now we strike. All ships, focus fire on their command vessels. Earth's fleet surged forward, their matte hulls slipping through the chaos like phantoms. Weapon systems came alive, turrets swiveling as they unleashed devastating volleys. The air on the bridge grew charged with energy, the vibrations of the ship's cannons resonating through the deck. Through the viewport, Kael watched as the first Zerath cruiser disintegrated under concentrated fire. Its hull fractured, glowing debris scattering into the void like embers from a dying flame. The Coalition's ships began to join the assault, their firepower bolstered by the precision of Earth's fleet. But the Zerath were not without their countermeasures. Their capital ships shifted, adapting to the disruption with unnerving efficiency. Drones swarmed toward Earth's vessels, their sleek forms darting through space with surgical intent. Enemy drones closing fast, Marek warned. They're targeting our flanks. Kael didn't hesitate. Deploy countermeasures. Hit them with flak and automated turrets. Keep them off our backs. The air grew heavier as Earth's ships responded, their defenses lighting up in a symphony of destruction. Explosions dotted the void, the drones detonating in flashes of light and shrapnel. But some broke through, their coordinated assault hammering at the fleet's shields. The Resolute shuddered, the vibrations rippling through Kael's boots. Sparks erupted from a nearby console, the acrid smell of burning circuits filling the air. Shields holding at 60%, Marek reported, his voice strained. Kael gritted his teeth. The Zerath were relentless, their precision like a scalpel cutting away at every weakness. He could feel the weight of the battle pressing against him, a tide threatening to overwhelm. But beneath it all, there was a quiet certainty, a fire that refused to be extinguished. "Commander, incoming message," Merrick said. "It's from one of the Coalition ships." Kael nodded, and the hollow projector flickered to life. A young Coalition captain appeared, her face pale but resolute. "Commander Draven, our defenses are buckling. If the Zerath breach our line—" "They won't," Kael interrupted, his voice firm. "Focus your fire on their drone carriers. We'll handle the rest." The captain hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. Good luck." The transmission ended, and Kael turned to his crew. "We need to finish this. Target their flagship. We cut off the head. The body will fall." The flagship loomed on the tactical display, a massive vessel bristling with weapons. Its angular hull glowed faintly with energy, a fortress among the stars. Kael knew this was the heart of the Zerath's command structure. If they could take it down, they could break the enemy's advance. "All ships, concentrate fire," Kael ordered. "Take it out." The Resolute fired, its cannons roaring as they unleashed a devastating salvo. The rest of Earth's fleet followed suit, their weapons converging on the flagship. The Zerath vessel's shields flared, struggling to absorb the onslaught. For a moment it held, its defenses a testament to the Zerath's technological superiority. But then, with a deafening crack, the shield collapsed. Earth's fleet pressed the attack, their firepower tearing through the flagship's hull. Explosions rippled across its surface, its sleek design crumbling under the assault. Finally, with one last burst of energy, the flagship disintegrated, its remains scattering into the void. Cheers erupted on the bridge, the tension giving way to a moment of triumph. But Kael's expression remained grim. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. "Commander," Merrick said, his voice quiet, "we're picking up something unusual." Kael turned sharply. "Define unusual." Marek hesitated, his fingers dancing across the console. "A signal from deeper in Zerath space. It's massive." Kael's chest tightened. He stared at the tactical display, the flickering signal a harbinger of something far worse than they had faced. The mystery was suffocating, and Kael knew one thing for certain. The Zerath were far from finished. The tactical display pulsed with the ominous signal, a deep red wave emanating from the depths of Zerath-controlled space. Commander Kael Draven leaned over the console, his eyes narrowing as he studied the readings. The bridge of the Resolute was bathed in a dim blue glow, the air charged with tension as every officer awaited his command. The faint hum of the ship's systems seemed louder in the oppressive silence. "Analysis," Kael said, his voice sharp but steady. Lieutenant Marek adjusted the controls, bringing up a detailed projection. "The signal is coming from a massive structure, Commander. Dimensions suggest it's a mobile platform, likely a superweapon." Kael's jaw tightened. A superweapon. The Zerath weren't retreating. They were consolidating their power for a decisive strike. The remnants of Earth's fleet and the Coalition's forces couldn't withstand something of that magnitude. The battle they had just won now felt like the prelude to an impending storm. "What's the range on that thing?" Kael asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs on the bridge. Marek's fingers flew across the console. "Uncertain, but if the energy output is anything to go by, it could target entire systems." Kael straightened, his mind racing. The Zerath weren't merely trying to secure victory. They were preparing to end the war in one catastrophic blow. He turned to Elise Kaelor, who had been silently observing the readings from a nearby console. "We need to neutralize it before it comes online," Kael said, his voice firm. Elise nodded, her expression resolute. "Agreed. But how do we get close enough? If it's as heavily guarded as the signal suggests, even our fleet won't breach their defenses without significant losses." Kael paced, the heels of his boots clicking against the metal deck. The scent of ionized air mixed with the faint tang of recycled oxygen, an ever-present reminder of the ship's life support systems. His mind churned, searching for a solution. "We can't approach it head-on," he said, stopping abruptly. "They'll see us coming from light years away." But if we can infiltrate their perimeter with a strike team, we could disable its core systems. Elise frowned. A direct infiltration? That's risky. You'd need to get past their fleet, their security, and whatever defenses they've built into that platform. Even with stealth modules, that's a long shot. Kael turned to the tactical display, his gaze intense. Long shots are all we have. If we don't stop that weapon, it won't matter how many ships we have left. We'll all be ash. The bridge fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the crew. Marek cleared his throat, breaking the tension. If we're going to attempt this, we'll need a diversion. Something to pull their fleet away from the platform long enough for the strike team to get in. Kael nodded. Exactly. We'll split the fleet. A decoy force will engage their ships on the outer edge of the system, drawing their attention. Meanwhile, the Resolute will lead a smaller group to infiltrate the platform's defenses. Elise stepped forward, her arms crossed. And the strike team? Who's leading that? Kael met her gaze, his voice steady. I am. The room fell silent again, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Elise's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. You're the commander of this fleet. Your place is here. My place is where I'm needed most, Kael countered. This mission requires precision and adaptability. No one else knows Zerath tech like I do. Elise stared at him for a moment, then exhaled sharply. Fine, but if you're going, I'm going with you. Kael hesitated, then nodded. Marek, you'll handle the fleet in my absence. Keep them coordinated and hold the line. The diversion has to look real, or the Zerath will see through it. Yes, sir, Marek said, his expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. The plan began to take shape, each piece falling into place with meticulous precision. Kael worked alongside his officers, reviewing schematics of the Zerath platform and coordinating the deployment of the decoy fleet. The Resolute was outfitted for the infiltration, its stealth systems calibrated to perfection. The strike team was assembled, a group of Earth's best operatives trained for high-risk missions. Hours later, the fleet jumped into Zerath-controlled space, their arrival marked by the sudden flare of stars shifting in the viewport. The enemy fleet appeared on the tactical display, a wall of ships arranged in a deadly formation. The Zerath ships gleamed with malevolent intent, their weapons glowing faintly as they moved to intercept. Decoy fleet, move into position, Kael ordered. Engage at will. The coalition ships and a portion of Earth's fleet surged forward, their weapons lighting up the void as they fired the first salvo. The Zerath responded in kind, plasma beams and missile barrages streaking through the darkness. Explosions rippled across the battlefield, casting fleeting shadows over the chaotic scene. Stealth systems active, Marek reported, were invisible to their sensors. The Resolute and its escort slipped past the battle, their engines emitting only the faintest hum. The tension on the bridge was palpable, each breath measured as the crew worked in silence. Kael could feel the weight of their trust pressing against him, a silent reminder of what was at stake. Through the viewport, the Zerath platform came into view. It was a monolithic structure, its surface bristling with weapon emplacements and glowing with the eerie light of its energy core. It hung in the void like a harbinger of doom, its sheer size dwarfing even the largest ships in Earth's fleet. Approaching the platform, Marek said, his voice hushed. Kael stood, his gaze fixed on the structure. Prepare the strike team, we're going in. The Resolute docked with the platform, its landing clamp securing it to an airlock on the station's outer hull. Kael and the strike team suited up, their armor sleek and black, designed for stealth and mobility. The air in the launch bay was heavy with the scent of coolant and the faint tang of ozone from charged weapons. Once we're inside, we'll split into 2 teams, Kael said, addressing the operatives. Team 1 will disable the platform's defenses. Team 2 will target the energy core. We need to move fast. Every second counts. The operatives nodded, their expressions hidden behind their helmets. Kael could feel their resolve, a quiet determination that matched his own. The airlock hissed open, and the team moved into the platform's interior. The corridors were dimly lit, the walls pulsing faintly with energy conduits. The air was cold, carrying a metallic tang that seemed to seep into their lungs. Every step echoed faintly, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the structure. Kael led the way, his weapon at the ready. His senses were heightened, every sound and movement amplified by the oppressive silence. The platform felt alive, its systems humming faintly beneath their feet. They encountered the first wave of Zerath guards near a control hub. The alien soldiers moved with inhuman precision, their weapons gleaming with deadly efficiency. Kael raised his hand, signaling the team to hold. "Wait for my mark," he whispered. The guards passed, their footsteps fading into the distance. Kael motioned for the team to move, their movements silent as shadows. They reached the control hub, a circular chamber filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays. "Team 1, take out the defenses," Kael said. "We'll handle the core." As the operatives split off, Kael led his team deeper into the platform. The energy core loomed ahead, a pulsating sphere of light encased in a lattice of conduits and machinery. It radiated power, its glow casting eerie patterns across the walls. Kael's communicator crackled. "Commander, defenses are down. You're clear to proceed." "Understood," Kael replied. He turned to his team, his voice firm. "Set the charges. Let's finish this." The operatives moved quickly, their hands steady as they planted explosives around the core. Kael watched the tactical display on his wrist, his mind already racing ahead to the extraction. But something was wrong. A signal spiked on his display, a warning he hadn't anticipated. "Commander," Elise's voice came through, sharp with urgency. "They know we're here." The faint vibrations beneath Kael Draven's boots intensified as alarms blared throughout the Zerath platform. A piercing red light bathed the metallic corridors, its rhythmic pulse seeming to echo the frantic thrum of his heartbeat. His comm crackled, Elise's voice cutting through the noise. "They're mobilizing reinforcements. Zerath troops inbound on every level," Elise warned. Her tone was clipped, but Kael detected the edge of urgency beneath her words. "Understood," Kael replied. "Team 1, status?" "We've disabled the defensive grid," came the sharp response from the lead operative. "But they're locking down the airlocks. Extraction won't be easy." Kael gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he surveyed the energy core ahead of him. Its pulsating glow cast long, flickering shadows against the walls, the hum of its power thrumming like a heartbeat through the cavernous chamber. The charges were in place, but the growing proximity of Zerath forces tightened the window of opportunity. "Keep moving," Kael ordered, his voice steady. "Team 2, final check on the charges." A soft confirmation echoed through the comms. Kael's team worked with precision, their movements deliberate despite the oppressive tension thickening the air. He inhaled deeply, the sterile scent of recycled oxygen tinged with the faint metallic tang of Zerath alloys. The platform felt alive, watching, waiting for their next move. Elise's voice cut in again, her tone sharp. "Zerath ships are adjusting formation. Their main fleet is converging on the decoy. Marek's holding the line, but they're outnumbered. If we don't move fast, he won't last." Kael's jaw clenched. The decoy fleet's survival depended on the Zerath remaining distracted, but the enemy was adapting faster than anticipated. He glanced at the charges, their blinking lights a stark reminder of the risk they'd taken to infiltrate this far. "Elise," he said, his voice quieter but no less firm, "we're activating Plan Echo." There was a brief pause on the line. "Plan Echo?" she echoed, incredulous. "Are you serious?" "It's the only way to buy Marek more time," Kael said. "We've already committed. No second chances." Plan Echo was Earth's ace in the hole, a fleet hidden in the vast emptiness beyond the known galaxy. Smaller, faster, and equipped with stealth capabilities that had been years in development, the Phantom Division was designed for surgical strikes. Until now, it had remained a classified contingency. Kael's decision to deploy them carried immense risk, but could tip the balance. "Elise, transmit the coordinates," he continued. "Tell them to engage as soon as the Zerath fleet begins its push." "You better be right," Elise said, but there was no hesitation in her voice. Kael turned to his team. "Detonate on my mark. We hit their core and extract before they know what hit them." The comms fell silent, replaced by the faint static of shifting positions. The distant clatter of Zerath reinforcements echoed through the corridors. The air grew colder as Kael signaled his team to take defensive positions around the chamber. He adjusted his rifle, the weapon's grip cool against his gloves, and focused his breathing. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Then, the first Zerath soldiers breached the chamber. They moved with eerie precision, their sleek armor glinting under the pulsating glow of the core. Weapons raised, their angular forms exuded an air of inevitability, as if their victory was assured. Kael's team opened fire, bursts of plasma lighting the room in brilliant flashes. The acrid scent of burning alloys mingled with the sharp sting of scorched air. "Hold them off!" Kael barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Zerath surged forward, their movements fluid and calculated. Kael crouched behind a column, the cold metal pressing against his back as he leaned out to fire. His shots struck true, but for every soldier that fell, another seemed to take their place. His HUD flared with warnings of heat buildup in his rifle as the chamber filled with the din of battle. Through the cacophony, Kael's comm chimed. Elise's voice crackled through, laced with urgency. "Phantom Division is en route. ETA 5 minutes." 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Kael glanced at the charges, their lights blinking in steady, unwavering defiance of the chaos around them. The energy core's glow intensified, the hum growing louder as if sensing its imminent destruction. "Team 2, prepare for detonation!" Kael shouted. "We're out of time!" A burst of energy struck the wall beside him, showering him with sparks. The acrid smoke stung his nostrils as he rolled to avoid another volley. His team was faltering, the relentless Zerath advance pressing them against the core. Kael's hand flew to his comm. "Merrick, we need extraction points clear now," he called. Merrick's voice was strained but steady. "Working on it. Phantom Division's strike is creating a gap. If you can get to Sector 7, we'll have an opening." Kael gritted his teeth. The corridor to Sector 7 was 3 levels away, and the path was undoubtedly crawling with Zerath. But it was their only chance. "Team 2, detonate and move," Kael ordered. A deep, resonant rumble shook the chamber as the charges detonated in a synchronized wave. The core erupted in a cascade of light and energy, its luminous tendrils tearing through the structure like molten claws. The platform groaned, the sound reverberating through Kael's chest as the shockwave rippled outward. "Go! Go!" Kael shouted, his voice almost drowned out by the deafening collapse of the core's containment. His team moved with practiced efficiency, their boots pounding against the trembling floor as they raced toward the exit. The corridors were a blur of flashing lights and the staccato rhythm of distant firefights. The platform shuddered with every explosion, the cold air now carrying the acrid bite of smoke and ozone. Kael's breaths came in sharp bursts, his lungs burning as he pushed forward. Behind him, the Zerath pursued relentlessly, their weapons cutting through the dimly lit passageways. Kael raised his rifle, firing in controlled bursts to cover his team's retreat. Each shot echoed like a war drum, its rhythm a constant reminder of the stakes. "Sector 7 in sight," one of his operatives called, their voice strained. The airlock loomed ahead, its reinforced doors glowing faintly with the energy of Earth's extraction signal. The team poured through, their movements synchronized as they secured the perimeter. Kael was the last to enter, his gaze sweeping the corridor before slamming the door shut. "Extraction team in position," Merrick's voice chimed through the communication. "Phantom Division is covering your exit. Enemy fleet is scattering." Kael exhaled sharply, his pulse still pounding in his ears. Through the viewport, he could see the Zerath platform collapsing in on itself, a cascade of fire and debris cascading into the void. Earth's fleet moved with surgical precision, their strikes coordinated as they pushed the enemy into retreat. Kael sank into the command chair of the Resolute, his breath slowing as the weight of the mission settled over him. They had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. Somewhere in the void, the Zerath would regroup, their retaliation inevitable. But for now, humanity had proven its strength and its willingness to fight. "Commander," Elise said, stepping beside him. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "We made it." Kael nodded, his gaze fixed on the debris-strewn expanse beyond the viewport. This was just the beginning. The Resolute drifted through the smoldering wreckage of the Zerath platform, its sleek hull marked by the scars of the battle. From the bridge, Commander Kael Draven stood like a statue, his gaze locked on the debris field spreading across the void. The muted hum of the ship's systems filled the air, a sharp contrast to the deafening chaos of the moments before. Every officer was silent, their breath shallow as they awaited his next command. "We've disrupted their superweapon," Lieutenant Merrick reported, his voice laced with both relief and caution. "But the main fleet is regrouping. Sensors show a massive energy spike. Something big is powering up." Kael turned slowly, his dark eyes narrowing. "Define big." Merrick tapped the console, projecting a holographic display into the air. The remnants of the Zerath fleet, though diminished, formed a tight perimeter around a single monolithic ship, larger than anything Kael had seen before. Its angular frame pulsed with an ominous crimson glow, the energy radiating from its core like the slow drumbeat of an executioner's march. "It's their command ship," Merrick continued, "heavily fortified, and—" His voice faltered for a moment before he steadied himself. "It's armed with a secondary superweapon. If they fire that, we're done." Kael clenched his fists, his gloves creaking under the strain. Every instinct told him they were outmatched, that Earth's fleet had already given everything it could. But surrender wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. He glanced at Elise Kaelor, who stood at the tactical station, her face set in grim determination. "What's the plan, Commander?" she asked, her voice steady but low. She didn't need to say it. This was their final stand. Kael exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the chilled air. "We hit them before they fire. Full force. Every ship, every fighter, every ounce of power we've got." "That thing will tear through us before we get close," Merrick warned. "Even with the Phantom Division, our odds—" "I know the odds," Kael interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. He turned to face the crew, his gaze sweeping over them. "This isn't about odds. This is about making sure the Zerath know they picked the wrong species to cross. We've come too far to back down now." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. The officers exchanged glances, their faces shadowed with fear, but also something else. A flicker of pride, of defiance. They had seen what humanity could achieve, even against impossible odds. Kael stepped closer to the viewport, his reflection merging with the void beyond. "The Zerath think they've seen what we're capable of. They haven't. Not yet. If this is our last stand, we make it one the galaxy will never forget." Elise nodded, her voice firm. "Let's remind them who we are." Kael turned sharply, the fire in his eyes igniting the bridge. "Marek, alert the fleet. Tell every captain, every crew member, this is it. We take out their command ship, or we die trying." Marek hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yes, sir." The comms buzzed with activity as orders rippled across the fleet. Kael could hear the faint voices of other commanders relaying his words, their resolve hardening with every syllable. The ships began to move, their engines flaring as they formed a vanguard around the Resolute. "Phantom Division," Kael continued, his tone sharp. "You'll flank their defenses, hit their weak points and keep them distracted. Coalition forces, focus on disabling their escorts. We'll lead the main charge." The fleet surged forward, their formation tight and unyielding. The Zerath command ship loomed ahead, its crimson glow intensifying as if daring them to come closer. Kael's chest tightened, the enormity of the moment pressing down on him like the weight of a dying star. As they closed the distance, the Zerath opened fire. Beams of searing energy lanced through the void, illuminating the battlefield with blinding bursts. Earth's ships darted and weaved, their shields flaring as they absorbed the impacts. The smell of overheated circuits and the sharp tang of ozone filled the air as the Resolute shook violently under the barrage. "Shields at 40%, Merrick called out, his voice strained. "Keep pushing," Kael barked, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. "Focus fire on their weapon systems. We take those out, and they're vulnerable." The fleet pressed forward, their weapons unleashing a symphony of destruction. Explosions rippled across the Zerath's escort ships as Earth's fighters tore through their lines. The Phantom Division struck from the shadows, their hit-and-run tactics sowing chaos among the enemy ranks. "Commander," Elise said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "the super weapon is charging." Kael's gaze snapped to the tactical display. The command ship's core glowed brighter, the energy pulsing faster like a heartbeat accelerating toward a climax. He knew they were running out of time. "Redirect all power to forward weapons," Kael ordered. "Target the core." "That'll leave us exposed," Marek warned. "We're already exposed," Kael shot back. "Do it." The Resolute's cannons roared to life, their concentrated blasts streaking toward the command ship. The rest of the fleet followed suit, their weapons converging on the glowing core. The Zerath responded with a ferocity born of desperation, their beams slicing through Earth's ships with ruthless precision. The Resolute shuddered violently as another impact rocked its hull. Sparks flew from a nearby console, the acrid smoke filling the bridge. Kael's ears rang, but he didn't flinch. "Commander, shields are failing," Marek shouted. Kael's eyes burned with intensity as he slammed his fist against the console. "Not yet. Hold the line." Through the chaos, Elise's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Direct hit on the core. It's destabilizing." Kael's gaze snapped to the viewport. The Zerath command ship trembled, its crimson glow flickering erratically. The energy buildup reached a fever pitch, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Then, with a deafening roar, the core detonated. The explosion rippled outward in a shockwave of light and fire, consuming the command ship in a blinding inferno. The Zerath fleet faltered, their formation breaking as panic spread through their ranks. Cheers erupted across the Resolute's bridge, the tension giving way to a flood of relief. Kael leaned against the console, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The galaxy's last hope had held, but the cost was written in the wreckage scattered across the void. "Commander," Elise said softly, her voice tinged with both triumph and exhaustion, "we did it." Kael nodded, his gaze fixed on the fading remnants of the Zerath command ship. "They'll think twice before underestimating us again." The bridge fell silent as the reality of their victory settled in. Earth's fleet, battered but unbroken, had faced the galaxy's greatest threat and emerged victorious. The galaxy would remember this day, not just as the day humanity answered the call, but as the day they proved their place among the stars. Kael turned to the crew, his voice steady but filled with unshakable resolve. "Signal the coalition. Tell them the galaxy is free, and tell them it was humanity that made it so."